Okay, I've been wanting to cover this one for a long bloody time.
Yo no soy ni vago, ni soy vicioso, ni soy un hombre de bien.
Yes. Okay, where do we even begin with this guy? Arturo Durazo Moreno is a national disgrace for millions of Mexicans. He was a breathing, walking embodiment of practically every vice known to man, and yet he rose to become the second most powerful man in the country after the president. Many of his contemporaries wondered how the hell he did it. But when you dig a little deeper and you trace this man's story, this notorious police chief who'd ultimately ransack his country for his own gain, then it becomes pretty clear. So let's do just that. Check these out. That is where little Arturo was born. No, sorry, that's where he liked to imagine he was born. My bad. This was actually Durazo Moreno's pad from the 80s, which he built with drug and extortion money and practically slave labor. After its Greek design, he called it the Parthenon. Now, if you think that's a colossal monument to his megalomania, you may proceed with this video for more absurdities. Durazo Moreno was actually born in the northern state of Sonora to humble rural origins in April 1924. We don't know much about his origins, and part of the reason for this is Durazo rewrote his own biography. Clearly, Durazo grew up ashamed of his background. He had 4 siblings, but he apparently disowned every single one of them. His mother, blind or going blind, he had put in a pretty subpar home in the state of Morelos, and despite showering her with gifts, as would a dutiful son, he never visited her with any friends or associates. It was always done on the down low. His father, officially, was General Francisco Durazo, but that was in fact his uncle. His real father was called Jesus. Durazo was so ashamed of his provincial origins that he jazzed them up, claiming his father was a great revolutionary general. But that was actually his uncle, and he went to great lengths to get those identities swapped. Now, at some point, the family moves down to Mexico City, lives in the well-known central Roma district. Historically upper class, but gentrifying quickly with low-rent accommodations. So Durazo grows up relatively poor, but in an area where rich kids mix with less affluent ones. Nowhere is this idea clearer than if you look at the people he went to school with, namely Luis Echeverria and José López Portillo. Both would go on to become Mexican presidents. Now, Arturo wasn't the sharpest bulb in the box, but what he lacked in intellect, he made up for in toughness and street smarts. He defended those two from the school bullies, and in return for his loyalty, Echeverria in particular would let him copy on him during exams. Remarkably, those two future presidents never forgot Durazo's loyalty, and Durazo made pretty damn sure to keep it that way. He grew up close to their families, even won tropical dance contests with the Portillo sisters. It is this rapport with those two that, in a fluke of history, is so key to understanding how far this guy actually goes. So, after school, we're told Durazo gets a business and administration degree. After that, he goes on to become what many had expected him to become, which was essentially a thug. He might have dabbled in the odd licit job, but the earliest we know about his early working days was as a bodyguard for a major Mexico City gangster named Manolo Prieto. As his driver, his messenger, his personal enforcer would have been quite the apprenticeship. You typically find him drinking and whoring in the city's cheap cabarets and lowbrow dance halls. Typical of bullies, for all his toughness, he developed a reputation as a backstabber and as a coward, priding himself on being, quote, the best discontonero in the country. A sucker puncher, essentially, who'd hit people hard when they weren't looking. Eventually, his boss, Prieto, gets busted, ends up at the infamous Lecumberri prison of Mexico City, leaving Durazo out of work. We're told he dabbles as a lowly clerk at a post office, then as a spare at a small bank branch. In 1948, he pulls a job as a traffic inspector with the city police. It is his first foray in the public sphere, and he appears to move up the ladder from there. Soon, quite incredibly, He is part of Mexico's newly founded Directorate of Federal Security. Many of you will know this one as the notorious Secret Services Agency, which was key to the government's repression of leftist insurgents during the Cold War era, but also the very corrupt agency who organized and protected major Guadalajara-based Sinaloan traffickers in the 1980s. It's not clear how exactly he was actually recruited. His experience as a thug probably helped. Some of the very first DFS agents were actually hitmen and gangsters, so he would have been in his element. His childhood friend, Luis Echeverria, was also already well established in the PRI party by then, so it's possible he pulled some strings for him as well. Two things stand out from what we know about his time in the DFS. One is Durazo would later boast about having tortured Fidel Castro and Che Guevara savagely. He told his bodyguard, while completely coked up and drunk, "If only you'd seen it. The bastards' little eyes were bulging out and the wax was coming out of their ears." He boasted that he had sodomized them with a broomstick and shocked their testicles with an electric cattle prod, among other vicious methods reminiscent of the Spanish Inquisition. Although the two revolutionaries were indeed detained in Mexico City and very likely tortured between June and August of 1956, we don't know for sure if what Durazo claimed was actually true. Even if it was BS, the sheer pride he took in telling that story is pretty revealing about what kind of character he was. The second point is, it could well have been through DFS contacts that he'd link up with two figures who were crucial to the history of the Mexican drug trade: the gun-slinging assassins turned narcos, Arturo and Hugo Izquierdo Hebrard. These two were former pistoleros, or hitmen from the state of Veracruz. They were part of a whole generation of mercenaries who were paid by rural landlords to go and harass and murder peasants in the decades after the Mexican Revolution, during a time of social upheaval and state-backed land reform. A lot of these mercenaries had helped the governor of Veracruz, Miguel Alemán, go on to become president, actually the first civilian president of the PRI party, which would go on to lord over Mexico for nearly 6 decades. Alemán took on a lot of these former pistoleros as his personal bodyguards, and he also placed them in high positions within the newly created DFS. So you had former gunmen and criminals like the Izquierdo Hebrard brothers inside or orbiting state institutions. Hugo ends up working as an enforcer in Sinaloa to one of the first state governors in Mexico who protects, taxes, and organizes drug traffickers at the state level. His colleague, by the way, is the future drug lord Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo. And Arturo, from a prison stint, links up with a major transcontinental heroin ring, which we now know as the French Connection. So why is this all relevant? Well, this is already a pretty good network for Durazo. And if it wasn't enough, he ends up marrying the Izquierdo Hebrard's sister, Graciela, in 1958. They end up living in Veracruz at the Izquierdo Hebrard family ranch before separating 2 years later. We're told Durazo essentially abandons her. Probably not the best of moves, given her brothers were professional killers, but there you go. Bolder still, when Izquierdo Hebrard gets out of jail and starts peddling heroin with a French Connection boss, one of the deals flops. The traffickers involved are arrested in Sinaloa, then tortured. Durazo apparently was behind that. They were tortured until they gave up the name of Arturo Izquierdo, by then Durazo's former brother-in-law. And Durazo forces him to give up his heroin source. Again, balls of steel. Graciela said he had a vendetta against the entire family. This whole episode is one of the ways in which we see him using his power to wrangle his way into big-time drug trafficking. Because within just a few years, Arturo Izquierdo and his associates in the French Connection are all paying protection to Durazo Moreno. Apart from this, his marriage to Graciela and his residency in Veracruz for 2 years, these would have been pretty damn formative. The Izquierdo Hebrards were in that twilight zone between the state and Mexican criminal rings, so very important links to some shady, informal power networks in the PRI state machinery. By the late 50s, he's said to have risen to the position of commander within the DFS, and he spends much of the following decade there. That agency is shrouded in a dark veil of secrecy, but it goes without saying that Durazo would have been forged here as a brutal agent in Mexico's bloody operations against left-wing subversives, both real and suspected. So that's students, unionists, workers, peasant guerrillas, activists, hundreds of cases of torture, forced disappearances, and extrajudicial killings completely litter that era. Durazo was a key part of that dark time in Mexican, indeed Latin American history, and he rose as security commander to be feared. In fact, there was something called the White Brigade. Durazo was a core member. It thrived in the 1970s under President Echeverria and López Portillo, and was essentially a terror network and death squad, a secret group of military and police officers involved in detaining, torturing, and killing hundreds of people branded opponents of the regime. So essentially, what we see Durazo doing in this period is gaining notoriety and power in Mexico's intelligence and enforcement apparatus. He's learning to terrorize, to control, and to extort people who could make him money. Often the sorts of people he was supposed to be taking down. Using the power he derived from the state, he learns how to become one of the most scandalous racketeers in the country's history until then. This primes him perfectly for another role he'd obtained by the late 60s. This time, a key role, and that is Federal Police Commander at Mexico City's International Airport. Now, as gatekeeper-in-chief to one of the country's most lucrative drug trafficking hubs, Durazo's criminal career goes stratospheric. So, what does he do? Well, naturally, he sets up a massive extortion racket. Any trafficker who wanted to peddle drugs via Mexico City Airport now had to go through Durazo, and he charged a hefty fee for the privilege. $200 per kilo, that's one scheme we have on record, which he kept on raising to as much as $500 per kilo. The narcotics were funneled through his own supply chain. He had couriers, refrigerated trucks, private planes he used to move shipments within the city, around Mexico, even right up to the US border. The system at the airport was pretty straightforward. One person would escort the drug couriers through immigration and customs before linking the courier up with one of Durazo's aides. That aide would then receive the drugs and take them to the commander himself. Failed to pay up, the drugs would get nabbed, and the courier would face torture, shakedowns, imprisonment, potentially even death. And Durazo wasn't just protecting and extorting. Because he had so many ties to the French Connection and other trafficking rings, he was involved as a wholesaler as well, using the same supply chains. One informer detailed how by 1974, a typical operation went something like this. 3 mules would move drugs inside the airport, 2 with multi-kilo loads, and 1 with just a few ounces. The one with just a few ounces would get busted, while the other 2 were hurried along to Durazo's aides. Durazo would then bulk out the seized load with a few kilos of milk powder, and then claim a major bust. So he got PR/I, brownie points, and he also got the dope money. Not bad. So already by this point, Durazo has raked in millions from his trafficking and protection scheme. For his influence and strategic position at the capital's airport, he was also getting paid by major politicians and Mexican businessmen, like the tycoon Carlos Trieu, helping them bring in huge loads of contraband. Given his ties to the shady world of counterinsurgency, it's entirely possible his position at the airport was helpful to the CIA, whose role in Mexico's dirty wars, besides training and coordinating with Mexican secret services, is indisputable around that time. President Luis Echeverria, famously a CIA asset. So where does Durazo go from here? Because Durazo wasn't just extraordinarily crooked, he was extraordinarily ambitious. He realizes pretty early on that things he's very good at, bullying, graft, and ingratiating himself with the right powerful people, were excellent ways to advance his power and wealth. It's important to note that by the mid-70s, Durazo's criminal and official career could actually have ended. the DEA had built an extensive investigation on him with vast evidence of drug trafficking going all the way back to 1960. And there was a secret 1976 indictment pushed by a grand jury in Miami charging Durazo Moreno with complicity in smuggling 5 shipments of cocaine into Florida in the early 70s. The prosecutor even issued an arrest warrant. That was sent through the US State Department, Mexico's Minister of the Interior, the Attorney General, and both Luis Echeverria and López Portillo. And what became of that? Zilch. Durazo not only dodges arrest, he gets a promotion. The new president, López Portillo, Durazo's old schoolmate, he steps in on the 1st of December 1976, replacing Echeverria. The previous months, Durazo had been his chief of security while he was campaigning for the election. That's how much he trusted the guy. And what does he do upon assuming office? He makes Durazo Moreno chief of police for Mexico City. Official title, head of the General Directorate for Police and Transit of the Federal District. How and why did he get the role? Well, an obvious factor is the new president. According to Benjamin T. Smith, Portillo had even told the US ambassador about his 40-year friendship with Durazo, how he'd helped him in, quote, the playground and in physical confrontations, that he essentially felt indebted to him, and his loyalty was unwavering. That said, he assured the ambassador that he wasn't under any illusions. He knew Durazo was a wild card, and he'd therefore be kept on a tight leash, and wouldn't hold any position in government that could involve him in narcotics. Well, let's just see about that, shall we? A second potential reason prosecution wasn't followed up is CIA intervention. Durazo would have been a key intelligence asset for the Americans and was clearly a linchpin of the Cold War era's counterinsurgency operations in which the CIA was embroiled via the DFS and other agencies. The CIA had intervened before to protect political and security assets involved in the drug trade, and they would do it again. So, having evaded prosecution, and with this incredible newfound power as chief of police of Mexico's capital, what exactly does Durazo Moreno do? One thing you need to understand, and this is well documented by historians like Luis Astorga and Benjamin T. Smith, is the administration of José López Portillo brings official corruption to new heights in Mexico. Durazo Moreno is one of several ultra-corrupt figures he puts in charge and who go on to centralize the drug trade out of Mexico City. The plaza system, many of you will have heard of, is really cranked up during his administration. And whereas it had previously been protected and managed at the state level by state governors and state police, now it goes federal. So that means officials from the federal police and from the Attorney General's office extorting, protecting, organizing drug traffickers who operate or pass through a zone or plaza. A chunk of that money stays within the plaza for the federal commander and his cronies, and the rest is sent to the top dogs down in Mexico City. Durazo Moreno is a key player in this development. This piecemeal, nationwide, often hyper-violent takeover of the country's existing protection rackets. It involved subduing the local state authorities and telling traffickers, right, we're your new masters now. You've got 2 options, plata or plomo. It also involved creating new plazas with new players in the game. So Durazo gets going with building his police empire, and his main cronies are some of the dodgiest commanders in the country, filled with pimps, gangsters, drug traffickers, all sorts of unsavory and totally unqualified types. At the top, you get real crooks, like this guy, and especially him, Francisco Sahagún Baca. Remember that name. We'll be doing another video on him, and it'll be up here once it's out. Sahagún Baca is another classic villain in 20th century Mexico. Ultra corrupt, ultra power hungry, and completely sociopathic. Before his appointment, he'd been a crooked federal police commander and top drug trafficker in the state of Jalisco. He fled the country after Mexico City started to crack down on his protection racket, and he hid out in Spain. It was only when Durazo became chief of police that he convinced the president to grant Baca amnesty. With that, Baca returns to Mexico and he's appointed as Durazo's right-hand man. He is an excellent link in Mexico's narcotics trade. Durazo knows this, and he goes on to help build and run Durazo's criminal empire as his totally servile, ruthlessly ambitious number 2. Now, what did this criminal empire actually look like? Open up any page of the extraordinary unofficial biography of Durazo, written by his former bodyguard, and you'll get insights on the incalculable number of schemes Durazo and his cronies were running. Think of the powers the police have to arrest, to bust, to fine, harass, intimidate. Now think of the many people and professions who might be vulnerable and at the mercy of those powers. So just to quickly run through some examples so you can understand the scale of this. You're a brothel owner and you don't want to get raided, you pay up. You're a taxi driver and you don't want to get fined or impounded, you pay up. You're a contractor and you don't want any permits blocked or any of your shady contracts exposed, you pay up. I think you see where I'm going with this. The police under Durazo completely loot both the capital's informal and formal economy, using threats of financial ruin, of prosecution, of violence, and of death. Complain about the extortion racket, same risks. From lowly street vendors to bank robbers and prostitutes, anybody is now a target. The rackets operate like mafia state pyramid schemes, so the money flows up and up through the ranks, and Durazo, of course, sits right at the top. Now, detailing Durazo's many crimes would make this video far longer than it needs to be, but there is one group Durazo was shaking down and extorting that we just have to look into in more detail. And that is the police force itself. So, what does this look like? First things first, the quota system. Basically, Durazo sets up a scheme where police officers are required to meet cash quotas if they want to keep their jobs. These were typically bi-weekly, so if corruption was already rife in the police, it was now practically industrialized. Ordinary policemen, so traffic cops, patrol officers, detectives, they now have even more incentive to go out and shake down pretty much anybody who was fair game. We're talking bribes from traffic stops and minor offences. We're talking kickbacks from bar owners, food vendors, minibus drivers, etc. Shakedowns of criminal suspects. Now, they weren't just pocketing it for themselves, a fixed portion now had to be handed over to their superior, and that was passed up the chain. The surplus, I gather, was theirs. Now, obviously, this is a huge incentive for predatory and ever-expanding institutional corruption and violence. Now you get cops fabricating crimes and looting anybody just to keep their jobs. Because that's how it worked. If they didn't meet their quotas, they'd get fined, the shortfall would be taken out of their already pathetic wages, they could get beaten, they could get arrested, reassigned to more dangerous positions like riot police, or they'd get sacked. A second scheme to bear in mind is the racket of, let's call them overheads. While Durazo's in charge, as we've seen, the police are encouraged, even forced to extort average Mexicans. That means, in theory, not in practice, potentially limitless earning potential. So Durazo's there thinking, hold on, these guys are making good money now. That's a privilege we're giving them. That badge gives them authority those little urchins should count themselves lucky to have. So what does he do? He forces them to buy their own gear. That's uniforms, boots, weapons. Now they're forced to pay for their own gasoline, their own car repair costs. You name it. Inevitably, this encourages even more corruption. Now you have cops who need to make up for those expenses. That's not going to be through pay increases, but through more bribes. It's just another measure of how low they'd fallen, self-financing their own gear through bribes to meet extortionate quotas so that they wouldn't lose their jobs. Moving on. Number 3, and this is the one Durazo is probably best remembered for among Mexicans, and that is the use of the police as his own personal workforce. Starting light, he'd famously ordered police to have entire roads and junctions blocked off and traffic diverted whenever he travelled with his convoy of motorcycles and armoured vehicles. But more iconic and more scandalous was the use of the police for the construction of his personal mansions. And now we're entering more into slave labour territory. I've already showed you some pictures of the Parthenon. This was very likely built using unpaid police as workers. You can actually go visit it. It's a tourist attraction in the state of Guerrero. Parenthesis, this could just be me, but it's actually quite surprising how tasteful it is. I mean, is it a disgrace to classical civilization? Yes. Was it paid for through rampant extortion and drug trafficking? Most definitely. But credit where credit's due. It could have been the kitschiest load of tack, and he actually pulled off something quite impressive. But bear with me because there's more. At some point, Durazo and his wife Sylvia decide the time was ripe to build yet another modest dwelling. And that, we're told, was a massive Swiss-style chalet in the volcanic Ajusco area, just south of Mexico City. They buy the land in a shady deal for far more than it's worth. Because of how revolutionary Mexican land allotment worked, he wasn't technically allowed to buy it from the shareholders. So he uses his clout to pressure the shareholders, then he wraps them up into his schemes. He puts their children on a police payroll, which they'd collect for doing nothing, essentially, but then he threatens them. If you try any funny business, well, your kids are holding a phantom position, which is illegal, so I have grounds to lock you up. Then he'd say, quote, I'm just telling you this in case one day you decide you don't want to be my friend anymore. This is a vintage Durazo Moreno trick, a real gangster move. But back to the Swiss-style chalet. We get this great story from the former bodyguard turned whistleblower José González. So Durazo's already bought the property. He, his wife, an architect, and González are all at the site on horseback. Durazo turns to the architect and he goes, all right, you bastard, how many people do you need? The architect says, sir, for the time Madame wants it done in, about 8 months, I need at least 150 workers. Okay, Durazo says, tomorrow you'll have 650 policemen. And that is basically what happens. But there's something else. There's no road connecting the property to the outside world. Durazo's wife insists there be no road. Quote, because whenever there's a road, the place fills up with humans. The architect is taken aback. He goes, but Senora, you do realize how much material we have to bring up here to build the place. Without a road, it'll all have to be carried on human backs. I don't give a flying about that, she says. That's why they gave you 650 little runts. That's your problem. End of discussion. And so it's almost farcical. You get this slave workforce of 650 policemen slugging it out for 8 months without pay for the sake of this multi-million-dollar chalet bought with dirty money. Just picture lines of men carrying the materials on their backs from the nearest road, which was about a kilometre away. The bodyguard compared it with the construction of the pyramids. And then there were the parties. Oh, the parties. The chalet, like his other luxury properties, was apparently the site of semi-regular, all-you-could-eat, all-you-could-drink, all-you-could-snort binges, with the odd orgy thrown in. Perhaps I should add, unsurprisingly by now, Durazo was a chronic cocaine addict, a heavy boozer, and a prolific cheat, according to the former bodyguard. And Durazo's appetite for fine dining was probably only surpassed by his appetite for mistresses and whores. Now, the personnel at these parties was almost entirely made up of police staff. They too had to carry all the catering supplies on foot for that kilometre-long, treacherous walk across the mountainside. And at night, they were ordered to set up heavy security perimeters around the compound, which caused frequent accidents because of almost zero visibility. So now we've seen some of the schemes involving the police, the quota system, the rackets, use of cops for his personal fiefdom, but now we need to turn to the atrocities and the brutal oppression by a man with little regard for human life, active in an era an institutional culture in which torture and extrajudicial killings are widespread. One of Durazo's key legacies is setting up a division called the DIPD, the Crime Prevention Investigations Division. It's a secret police unit, mainly headed by Francisco Sagumbaka. It's one of the most feared during his time in power, by criminals, by urban subversives, or pretty much anybody suspected of either one. Its main enforcement group is nicknamed the Jaguars. There was an estimated 350 members. They're closely aligned with the terror network of the DFS, and they essentially replace the already mentioned paramilitary death squad, the White Brigade, most active in the 70s, of which Durazo had been a key member. Now, the Jaguars' abuses are infamous, and many of them are lost to the sands of time. Arbitrary detention, torture, forced disappearances, the usual horrific suspects in Mexico's dirty war. They're also behind major bank robbery. One case that particularly stands out is the Río Tula massacre. Whereas many of the crimes of the Jaguars and the DIPD more generally went undocumented, this one actually broke out, and it shocked the country. One of the many criminal groups which Durazo and Sagumbaka protected was a gang of Colombian thugs who'd entered the country illegally. As they didn't have any priors, they were encouraged to rob factories, to rob houses, and especially to rob banks. Durazo and Baka were getting hefty cuts from the loot. One day, one of the members, a Mexican actually, he gets nabbed by the police and he rats out some of his gang members. Baka and Durazo, who are notified of the arrest, they figure, well, because the guy's been caught and there's now a dead source of revenue for us, we might as well just rob them of their entire loot rather than just skim it. They do exactly that. Tens of millions of pesos worth. Then they lock them up. Those who can bribe their way out are allowed to leave the country. They're actually told to return with cocaine. Those who can't pay end up being brutally tortured, murdered, then dumped into the Tula River in the state of Hidalgo. The barbed wire in the sewage canal would mutilate them more than they already had been. Durazo, it was later revealed, had given the order. Baka had overseen the arrangements. The 14 or so disfigured, in some cases decapitated bodies that surfaced in early 1982 completely shock the country. Durazo and his cronies blame subversives. It is months later that the truth finally comes out, with official and media investigations exposing the police's role in the massacre and the attempted cover-up. Now you get even more shock and outrage. The reports confirm the suspicions among millions of Mexicans that the federal police was absolutely rotten to the core, and that this case was really just the tip of the iceberg. In fact, the scandal proved to be the great catalyst. Part of the reason Durazo and Baka were milking their rackets dry during this period was because there was a change of administration on the horizon. Durazo's old crony and protector, López Portillo, was due to leave office on the 1st of December 1982. There was no knowing if his successor would have Durazo's back, and there was the real possibility the police chief would have to leave office as well. That is exactly what happens. President Miguel de la Madrid steps in on the 1st of December 1982, and that is the last day Moreno is seen in public. Probably a good shout. López Portillo exits office, leaving behind a major financial crisis and huge popular dissatisfaction with the tanking state of the economy, as well as rampant government corruption. So, to re-legitimize the PRI in the eyes of the electorate and the eyes of the US, De la Madrid sets out on a campaign of moral renewal across Mexican society. That means a crackdown on official corruption and abuse of power. And who was the most conspicuously outrageous embodiment of these? Durazo Moreno, of course. El Negro becomes the ultimate fall guy, the scapegoat for this new administration that's desperately trying to score political points. That said, even they wanted Durazo out. The guy was a complete embarrassment at this point. Ahead of the presidential succession, Durazo had been preparing for the worst. According to a confidential report obtained by Proceso magazine, between August 1982 and February of 1983, troves worth of police files, from documents to police reels, were destroyed by the police. At the same time, Durazo had been trying to curry favor with the incoming president. Clearly, that didn't work, as the guy went into hiding pretty much the moment De La Madrid came to power. It appears from a now declassified FBI report that Durazo had fled the country and was spending much of his time between the US and Canada, where he had properties and millions of dollars stashed away, and where he was also trying to acquire citizenship. There were also alleged sightings in Europe and even further afield. Incredibly, and this we know from the FBI document, he was actively trying to assemble and finance a group of mercenaries to assassinate the new president. The DFS, in turn, who were well aware of this, likely sent agents into the US to try and assassinate Durazo. By early '84, the charges are rolled out. Mexico's Attorney General's office accuses him of tax evasion on over 80 million pesos worth of assets. 1 week later come the arrest warrants, and then the manhunt. 144 countries are involved. It's one of the biggest manhunts in Mexican history. 2 months later, you get more charges slapped onto him for illegal firearm possession and smuggling contraband. Mexico is officially seeking his extradition. You get a 3-month manhunt, and then on the 29th of June 1984, Durazo Moreno is arrested by FBI agents at San Juan Airport, Puerto Rico, just coming back from Brazil. With the option to be tried in Puerto Rico for his extradition case, he opts for LA instead. It's a hell of a trial, one of the most important extradition cases in US-Mexican history till then. It's also one of the most sensitive. Given death threats, the intel on the DFS-backed assassins, and just how much dirt Durazo had on his peers in government, Durazo's security during the trial was a major feature. We're talking safe houses instead of prison, zero contact with family, locked doors at court, and a massive, heavily armed security detail. Durazo ends up losing the case. He keeps on appealing until he exhausts his legal options, and a Supreme Court ruling confirms the extradition order. By April of 1986, after 20 months of proceedings in the US, Durazo is extradited back to Mexico to face another litany of trials. Unsurprisingly, Durazo appears to have threatened witnesses and the police, many of whom recanted their statements as a result. But ultimately, Durazo El Negro Moreno is convicted of extortion, specifically and of all the possible charges for extorting vehicle licensing officers and auxiliary cops. He's also convicted of stockpiling weapons. Those were the two main counts. His properties are confiscated, many of his assets are seized, and he's eventually sentenced for 16 years behind bars at the Reclusorio Norte in Mexico City. Now, flash forward just 6 years later, it's March 1992, and funnily enough, El Negro is released. Officially, he gets out on the grounds of declining health, good behavior, and a 3 million peso bail. No doubt there were political machinations behind the scenes from PRI loyalists. The old crook goes on to retire in Acapulco with his family, a man despised at this point by most of his countrymen. He wins a defamation lawsuit against his previous bodyguard, José González, whose memoir sold nearly 1 million copies. What exactly happened to that whistleblower, I couldn't find on public record. We can probably assume, though, that his life was in serious danger. One interesting tidbit from Durazo's final days concerns his philanthropy. He apparently helped alcoholics with recovery programs. By August 5th, 2000, aged 81, the man who had plundered Mexico was dead, reportedly of a colon cancer. So, early release, bit of charity work, and death, though admittedly likely quite a painful one, death by the seaside. overall, not too bad. Did he feel any remorse for his looting of the state? For turning public office into a personal revenue stream? Who knows? Durazo Moreno is practically a comical figure for the depth, the scale, and the sheer variety of his corruption. In many ways, the guy is a cartoon villain and has to be one of the greatest crooks in Latin American history. But then you realize, well, actually, this one man really did a lot to help fuck up his country, not only impacting tens, if not hundreds of thousands directly with his reign of terror and his extortion, but also playing a huge role in affecting the course of Mexican history for the worse. This guy was key to the acceleration of predatory state corruption and to the increasing interconnectedness between the PRI and drug traffickers. And he did this, as most of them do, for his own gain and enrichment. He drove the expansion of state-run drug plazas. He made a criminal career helping to build the Mexican trampoline. And he helped build the state infrastructure to protect and organize Mexico's first major cartels. This was when the state was still firmly in charge, but that wouldn't last. As the drug traffickers get wealthier and more powerful, the plazas the state had set up are steadily taken over by them and their organizations. Mexico's widespread extortion culture, massively accelerated by Durazo Moreno, especially in the targeting of non-criminal civilians, is taken up by the cartels by the early 2000s and is now a staple of the modern cartel scene. Durazo Moreno wasn't acting in unison, and he was ultimately part of a broader system, but true to his alias, he left Mexico a much darker country than the one he'd entered into.